You see a collapse in Mesoamerica from about 20 to 25 million people to about 1.5 million between 1500 and 1650. A collapse in Peru from 5 million to 300,000 between 1520 and 1780. Here in California, the numbers are estimated to be about 310,000 Native Americans to 16,350 between 1760 and 1880. Any questions? Now, I want to stress the importance of trade in these dynamics, these interactions. Obviously, trade is a major reason for people to travel to other places that they otherwise don't necessarily get to or see very often. At the time, trade wasn't people in cars or people in airplanes. Trade was very often people with animals riding on horseback or being pulled by horses, for example. In ships, there would frequently be animals along as well. You can also transmit germs inadvertently in the things you're carrying or in the things that come along without your trying in the things that you're carrying, right? So if you've got a shipload of wheat or corn or some grain, chances are quite good that in that grain there will be some mice or some rats or some insects, that kind of thing, that might also transmit these diseases. In effect, trade increases the effective size of your host populations so that even if the distribution of people in terms of where they live is fairly thin, right, sort of spread out over large areas and might not look like it constitutes a crowd for purposes of the mutation of these germs, if the movement of people between the different communities is sufficiently active or occurs at a sufficient rate, they do become a host population taken as a whole, right? And here again, it's a question of how frequently they interact relative to the rates at which these germs are making their way through hosts and mutating. So speed and frequency are key. The microbe must not die out. And in a lot of ways, infrequent contact is more dangerous than regular contact, from the human perspective, that is, right? In terms of how dangerous a given microbe is to a human population, if you are in ongoing regular contact with a large population, even if it's spread out, you are going to be in ongoing regular contact with whatever germs those people carry, right? And you are going to encounter those germs. Your parents will encounter them, you will encounter them from a young age, and your immune system will essentially get used to them, will adjust to them. Yeah, you might die, right? You're a little kid, you might get whooping cough and perish from it, but if you don't perish from it, you're going to come out with resistance to it. And chances are you're going to continue to encounter it, and your resistance is going to be sufficient that you'll keep fighting it off, and by continuing to fight it off, you will continue to maintain resistance. And you can go the rest of your life and not have to worry about it. If, on the other hand, your contact, or the contact through trade that you have with dispersed human settlements is really infrequent, say it only happens every 10 or 15 or 20 years or something like that, then chances are that something will happen with a germ in that other community over the course of 10 or 20 years, and you will not have a chance to respond to it immunologically. And when it does come back, you will essentially be no longer immune to it. And you will stand a good chance of getting sick, and you might, in fact, get much more sick than you would have if you'd been in ongoing contact. So here again, think about the ways in which germs move through, say, the interior North American continent between 1500 and, say, 1900. And in a lot of that area, the contact was very episodic for most of that period, right? You might have an explorer or a trader or a missionary, for instance, who makes their way out into some area, and apart from that person or that party of people, there might not be hardly any other European sort of incursions into that area for quite some time. Maybe years, maybe decades. I mean, after the De Soto expedition through the southeastern U.S., it was about 100 years, a little more than 100 years before other Europeans happened to follow along through that area, right? Which meant that the first round of diseases had worked its way through and decimated the native population. But by the time the next European showed up, any Indians who were still living there, still alive, there would be a whole new generation of people, right? There would have been complete turnover by that point. And none of those Native Americans could be expected to have had a chance to build up resistance to the germs. So the whole process could start over again. Here's a map that was produced a couple years ago. As you know, these questions of germs mutating between animals and humans has been very much in the news in the last 5 or 10 years, right? Whether it's avian flu or swine flu, this issue has not gone away. This map indicates and depicts where the likelihood of transmission of infectious diseases between humans and animals is greatest. Any patterns that anybody sees there? Yeah. Okay, it looks as though it still correlates pretty closely with human population densities, right? Whether you're talking about South Asia or East Asia, Nigeria, the northeastern United States, that looks like the area around Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, right? The highest density human settlements seem to map pretty closely here with the likelihood of these diseases going back and forth between humans and animals. Obviously, we also have to think about the density of animals. And the density of animals, particularly chickens and other fowl, in some parts of the world, particularly parts of Asia, is extraordinarily high, in addition to the high density of humans, right? All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back. Okay, let's get going again. This is a site in Central America, obviously a fairly impressive structure. This is actually not this picture exactly, but this site is discussed in the book-length version of 1491. Charles Mann's article was so successful that next thing you know, there was a book-length treatment. And it's a great book. The only problem is that it's like 450 pages long, and so it doesn't fit very neatly into the syllabus for the course. We don't quite have time for it. I would encourage any of you who are interested to look at it because he elaborates this argument, as you can well imagine, in much greater detail. And this is a site that he uses as an example of the kind of thing that this was only just discovered in the last 50 years or so. Until that point, it was completely overgrown with trees, and it looked from a distance like a hill. And there's a photograph in the book version of 1491 in which it looks like a hill. And so people just flew over it and then thinking of it for a long time. And then they discovered it, so to speak, They took the trees off of it, right? And it turns out that there are quite a few of these monuments in different parts of the Americas. And this is the kind of thing that is evidence for the thesis of the book, which is the thesis of the article, which is what? Nobody did the reading? Yeah, there you go. Okay, there were a lot more people living in the Americas at the time of contact, 1491, 1492, than was previously believed. And quite possibly more than were living in Europe at the time. And moreover, it's quite possible that the civilizations of the Americas, and here we're thinking principally of the Incas in Peru, and the Mayas and the Aztecs in Central America and what's now Mexico, that those civilizations were in many ways more advanced, more complex, more sophisticated than European cities, civilizations, at least in many respects. In terms of political organization, in terms of knowledge particularly of subjects such as astronomy, in terms of the density of the cities themselves, the artistic, cultural productions of those societies, and perhaps also in terms of simple things like public health, equality perhaps even, the sort of standard of living of the average person. Now, the question I would pose to you is, if Mann is right, and he would readily admit these aren't his discoveries, he's putting together the information of a lot of researchers, including Crosby, but Crosby as well as more recent archaeologists, anthropologists, demographers, he's putting it all together and putting forward this argument. The question is, what, if anything, does that do to Crosby's argument in ecological imperialism, or if you've read Jared Diamond's argument in Guns, Germs, and Steel? Any thoughts? Does this refute Crosby? No. Why not?
Because Crosby was arguing about, he's not really arguing about population at all. He's just saying the methods in which augmentation was much quicker.
Okay. For Crosby's argument to hold, it does not necessarily have to be the case that the peoples of the New World were less populous than the peoples of Europe.
It makes sense over the illnesses because if you need a large population for it to be really effective, it might be people out, then that works with Crosby's argument.
Okay. It intersects interestingly with the question of illnesses, right? If these crowd diseases were key, on the one hand, that would say, okay, yes, if you've got a dense, large population of humans in these places in the New World, then those diseases are going to have a large population of people with no resistance, and they're going to have a devastating effect. On the other hand, it also obviously raises the question, well, then how come there weren't crowd diseases that had evolved in the New World if you had large densities of people? Yeah.
Well, back to the overgrowth hypothesis,
Okay. If what was needed in addition to dense populations of humans was also dense populations of domesticated animals, and here it also matters what kinds of animals they are, right? Because of the physiology of different animals and the immune systems and the susceptibility of humans to be able to contract the germs from different kinds of animals. We can readily contract strains of flu that have been moving around in pig populations, for example. But if pigs had different physiology, different immune systems, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. There are other animals for which it's very difficult for germs to move between those animal populations and humans, right? So if the New World civilizations had lots and lots of people, but they didn't have lots and lots of livestock, then the kinds of crowd diseases that we've been talking about here today would not have had the conditions in which to evolve. And therefore, the larger argument of Crosby still fits together. How many of you have read Jared Diamond? One, two, several. Any thoughts about whether this argument poses a problem for Jared Diamond's argument? Yes, no, maybe? It's been a while, okay. Anyone else? Well, yes, it's true. Jared Diamond also draws attention to guns and steel as critical differences between New World and Old World societies. And in that, but that's sort of that's not necessarily made problematic by this argument. I mean, the argument that Jared Diamond, his whole argument is constructed around the metaphor of a race, right? There's a starting line. The starting line is basically like 12,000 years ago, and he says that at that point in time, all the populations of people in the world were in the same condition, basically, at the same place. That's why it's a starting line. They all had a fair start, so to speak. And then the race started. And he says the European populations basically were way ahead by 1492, and that sort of asymmetry, that difference between the rate of development, so to speak, between the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution and the present, or 1500, explains what happened afterwards. And from that vantage point, this argument is, I think, a little problematic, because what we see is evidence that, in fact, by most measures of progress, whether it's the brilliance of the architecture, the monumental architecture of the civilization in question, or the density of their population, or the complexity of their social organization, that it's basically misleading to suggest that Europe was somehow ahead of parts of the New World. For that matter, what does it mean to pretend that you have a single scale by which to compare all the civilizations of the world and then decide which one is ahead and which one is behind anyway, right? So that part, I think, is problematic. Now, so this doesn't reproduce very nicely. This comes out of the book, 1491. The first one is the line. I've got to get a new battery for this thing. The limits of agriculture. So down here, there's a little portion of South America to which agriculture had not spread at this point. The very darkest are irrigation systems. You see a lot of them in Central America in a little blow-up map. Also parts of the Andes. Areas with terracing, mostly irrigated. Areas with raised fields, includes other earthworks. Widespread forest clearing for agricultural and or game management. Areas dominated by anthropogenic fire are the hashed ones. This does not, you'll have to go find a book and look at this if you really want to study it closely. And then finally, agroforestry concentrations, patchworks of gardens, orchards, and managed forests. And the point of this map is just to give you a sense, if you take all of the different cases, all the instances, all the archaeological and anthropological evidence, and put it all on one map, to give you a sense of how widespread these humanized landscapes were at the point of contact, right, in 1491. So much of the Amazon, most of Central America, much of what's now Mexico and the southwestern U.S., and most of both coastal eastern U.S. and the Great Plains, Mississippi, and Missouri basins. Highly humanized landscapes. And the take-home point really is not just that there were lots of people here, but that these people were actively manipulating and impacting, affecting the landscapes in which they lived, the environments in which they lived. Why is this such a dramatically eye-opening or surprising argument in our context? What makes this such a big deal? Right? Mann describes that Crosby put together this hypothesis or this argument, and the manuscript sat on the shelf for 3 years because no one would publish it. Right? Making these arguments about a larger than believed, earlier believed American population. Later, he put together Ecological Imperialism. Both books are still in print. He talks also about Henry Dobbins, who most forcefully articulated an argument for a human population in the Americas in 1491 that was orders of magnitude larger than previously believed. And he set off this firestorm. Huge debates, controversies. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's so controversial. And a lot of it has to do with this. It has to do with wilderness, the idea of wilderness, and the power of the idea of wilderness among North American environmentalists. So here we have, these are direct quotations, excerpts from the 1964 Wilderness Act, which is a piece of federal legislation that gave birth to, so to speak, created what we call now the wilderness system, the system of wilderness areas in the United States. The wilderness is an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. Of course, that's a little too general for a statute. How are you going to tell an agency what to do with that definition? So they had to go on and define it further. An area of undeveloped federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions. How many of you have been to a wilderness area? Set foot in a wilderness area. What were you doing when you were there? Hiking. Anybody else? What else? You're all hiking? Trespassing, even better. Probably still look a lot like hiking, though, right? You just didn't have the permit? Yeah. Okay. You were living according to this. You didn't stay, right? You left. You were a visitor who does not remain. Did you trammel it? Yeah? You trammeled it? Darn it. Then it's no longer wilderness. So this is a very central piece of U.S. environmental law, right? It was the result of years of active political struggle dating back to the early 20th century to create this category of land called wilderness.